You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. The Chris Voss Show. Welcome to the big show, my friends. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, refer the show to your family, friends, or relatives. Reach out to them. Say, have you subscribed to the Chris Voss Show? Have you found our Lord and Savior podcast? It's not a Lord and Savior. It's not a cult. Don't do that. Anyway, guys, be sure to refer the show to family, friends, and relatives. Goodreads.com/Chris Voss. Follow us over there. YouTube.com/Chris Voss. LinkedIn/Chris Voss. All the LinkedIn properties, LinkedIn newsletter, and all the crazy stuff we have going over there as well. And possibly TikTok. See what we're doing over there, trying to do over there. We're trying to get the format right. So anyway, guys, we have an amazing author on the show. And as you know, we only have amazing authors on the show. It's kind of the rule of the Chris Voss Show. If you're unamazing, you're not on the show. I'm the only one who's the unamazing author on the show. But we have the most amazing authors on the show. And we have the hottest new book that just come out January 10th, 2023. The Riders Come Out at Night. Brutality, Corruption, and Cover-Up in Oakland. We have one of the authors with us. Winston is on the show. His co-author couldn't be with us. Darwin BondGraham I guess he's traveling right now, so we missed him having on the show. But we're excited to have Mr. Graham, we've got the pop-up here blocking me. We're excited to have Winston on the show as co-author. Is an independent reporter covering criminal justice, privacy, and surveillance. His work has been rewarded with several awards, including the George Polk Award for local reporting in 2017. Is a graduate of the University of Chicago and University of California, Berkeley. He lives in New York. You can follow him at Twitter at A Winston. Welcome to the show, Ali. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for coming. We certainly appreciate it. We spent a week at CES, and evidently that got us off our game on the show. So we're trying to find which way's up at this point. I'm still just like, what do we do again on the show? How does this work? But congratulations on the new book. Give us a .com or wherever other places you want people to find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, I mean, you can find The Riders Come Out at Night at Simon & Schuster's website. That's our publisher. Atria Books is the imprint. You can shop for it at IndieBound or bookshop.org. If you have to, you can use Bezos Corp. I don't like them, but local bookstore is a great place for it. But there's also an audiobook version of it as well. It sounds fantastic. There's an ebook for the people who like to read PDFs online or on Kindle. This is the compendium of basically more than basically 25 years of combined reporting from Darwin and myself in Oakland. And we tried to really write not just a history of policing in Oakland, but also a little bit of urban history and answer some broader questions or address broader questions about law enforcement and whether or not the current system we have works.
Yeah, this is really an interesting read. It's almost like a version of Training Day. And, it's the movie Training Day. Now you guys had both won Polk Awards, so you got together to write this book. I see 3 awards behind you. Do you want to reference what those are?
These are Emmys other people have won. No, we actually started writing together in 2012, way back in the mists of time. Mm-hmm. And the Polk that was awarded to us very generously was for a sex trafficking scandal in 2016 that involved dozens of law enforcement officers from Oakland and other agencies around the Bay Area exploiting a young woman. And then in Oakland, the police department there covered it up, and then the cover-up didn't work, emerged and kind of put their reform effort back several years. But, the hardware isn't important. Don't worry about all that stuff.
There you go. So you what caused you guys to get together and write this book? What was the thing that brought you guys together for it?
Well, the thing that brought us together years ago, and I'm sorry, Darwin's, my better half isn't here to tell this part of the story, but I was a reporter for a public radio station in San Francisco, and I had I would shoot my own photographs and write reports. My editor would help me put it up there. And we were all over just running around like a chicken with my head cut off, kid in my mid-20s. And I took, there was one photograph I took while I was on a ride along in West Oakland, and there was a call for somebody who was having a mental health emergency, and the cops were standing around talking to him, and social workers were there. They were trying to communicate with him and make sure the situation didn't escalate. Big, burly dude. And one of these cops pulled his taser and was holding it low behind him in a ready position, but like behind his back, and kind of stepped off to the side. And I dropped my camera down to my hip, to my thigh, and took a shot of it upwards. It was a nice shot, if I don't say so myself. But I was reading Darwin's blog at the time. He'd moved up to the Bay from Santa Barbara, where he just finished a doctorate and was doing some reporting. And I followed his work. He was a really good writer, really fantastic researcher. I saw the photograph on there without credit, and I emailed him and said, "Listen, man, I love your blog. Just put my name on that thing. I don't need any money, And then we started talking. We figured out we had common interests. We started writing articles together about just covering broader issues of power and policing. And then we did some bigger picture things first, like where the cops live, where money was going in terms of like how much money from the city of Oakland migrates out when you employ a police force that's 90% commuters.
Wow.
And then, pensions and all that stuff, because it's a big part of any city's budget line. And then over the years, we kind of learned that we were a pretty good team and did a lot of reporting on the situation in Oakland and a bunch of other places around the country. Yeah.
There you go. It's fun. You come together. I mean, sometimes when you use other people's pictures, you get hate mail, especially if who's the big agency that buys like everything?
Getty,
man. You use one of their pictures? Woo!
Yeah, the letter. No, I mean, it was, and then while we were doing these reports we were putting together, we were writing mostly for an alt weekly, the East Bay Express, which has since fallen on harder times, as the entire sector of the media has. And the nice thing about those weeklies was that they were a little bit offbeat and not like, they gave you a little bit more time and circumspection in the editing to be critical and analytical and think about issues in a way that didn't keep you on too tight a deadline, so you could have some space to write. And even though we'd get, for our features, we get 3,000, 5,000, 8,000 words, we kept on saying there are all these things that are on the floor. We're dressed at the cutting room. We're looking at all these like symptoms, these scandals and one-off things we have in the structure of the article. And this is, it's not to say it's a bad thing, but the way that magazine and long-form articles go, you kind of reference the deeper history in the context of like, okay, well, here are the underpinning problems here. And in Oakland, there's been this 20-year effort, 20 years this month, to try and reform the police department through a consent decree, a legal mechanism that's supposed to address deep constitutional flaws in policing or another institution like prisons, mental institutions, school districts. They're all, when there's issues, they're sued and under a pattern and practice case, and then a consent decree is implemented to try and set out a reform program to right the wrong. It's the mechanism, flawed, certainly, but it's a mechanism that American society uses to try and address these issues when they reach a critical point. And Oakland had been under the consent decree when I first got there in 2008 for 5 years, then 10 years, then 15 years. And, we said at some point, we do have to write the deeper history of this place. We do have to try and address like, okay, why has this gone on so long? What's the problem here? Is it just the city of Oakland? No, because it's a very interesting place, very remarkable place in its own regard. It's further left than most of the country is, I think, in terms of its local politics. But in some ways, it's not that different, right? It's not New York or Los Angeles or Chicago or Houston. It's about 420, 450,000 people. Pretty mixed up racially. Job mix as well. White collar, blue collar. Just not the sort of place that, a lot of other cities around the country are very similar to it and have similar problems. So we thought it'd be a good way to get at the problem of police reform and also like write a history of a really important place that we feel has been a little bit overlooked. Like San Francisco, in the Bay Area, San Francisco, which is just across the bridge, has far worse weather. The local politics are just, and Oakland has its own problems too, but San Francisco is just it sucks up a lot of the oxygen, and Oakland doesn't really get the shine that it deserves.
Definitely.
So in a way, we tried to write a book that's the history of a place using law enforcement as the central institution of the state, because it's what most people come into contact with when they come in contact with city government. They don't think of the state as like the garbage man or the post office or the postman that comes around and drops off their mail. And one of our models was a book by a dearly departed sociologist named Mike Davis called City of Courts. It's about Los Angeles. He wrote it right before the riots in the rebellion in 1992. And it really is, it's a staggering piece of urban history. And that was kind of our model.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here with a little station break. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. We'll resume here in a second. I'd like to invite you to come to my coaching, speaking, and training courses website. You can also see our new podcast over there at chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Over there, you can find all the different stuff that we do for speaking engagements if you'd like to hire me, training courses that we offer, and coaching for leadership, management, entrepreneurism, podcasting, corporate stuff. With over 35 years of experience in business and running companies as CEO, I think I can offer a wonderful breadth of information and knowledge to you, or anyone that you want to invite me to for your company. Thanks for tuning in. We certainly appreciate you listening to the show, and be sure to check out chrisvossleadershipinstitute.com. Now back to the show. Wow. And I guess Oakland's been the longest city under this court oversight than any other law enforcement body in the nation.
Yes, and that's by a little bit of an accident of history, and it's also it's really fortuitous. So, consent decrees, when it comes to law enforcement, since Congress passed a bill in the mid-1990s under the Clinton presidency, allowing for the federal Department of Justice to bring pattern and practice lawsuits against police departments involved in really egregious abuses. The law was passed after Rodney King. And LAPD was considered, okay, well, this is a department that has deeply documented problems and flaws. And states also passed similar laws, so states' attorneys general could also bring similar suits. A number of police departments went under these consent decrees following their own respective scandals. We mentioned Training Day earlier. And Training Day is based on, when was that? 2001, 2000?
The Rampart.
Yeah, so scandal. That film, which is brilliant in its own right, is based on is deeply rooted in a scandal called the Rampart scandal involving LAPD officers who framed up people, beat them, stole narcotics, sold it back to the streets, really gross stuff. And it was an entire division at the time that was involved in that conduct. That suit was brought by the Federal Department of Justice. They also pursued cases against police in D.C., Washington, D.C. Metro, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Since then, they've done cases against Chicago PD, Seattle, New Orleans, the list goes on. In Oakland, that didn't happen because the Riders scandal broke in a scandal that the book is named after involving 4 officers who were charged. There were others involved in the conduct, but 4 officers were accused by a young rookie who they were ostensibly training and in reality trying to basically introduce and induct into their ways of completely unconstitutional policing, framing people up with fake narcotics that they didn't have on them, beating them, kidnapping some of them, emptying cans of pepper spray into their mouth, busting one guy's eyeball up with an elbow drop so bad that his cornea almost burst. These officers, when their information came to light, when this rookie blew the whistle on them, which later led to 2 criminal trials, they were acquitted, hung juries, a little bit of noble cause corruption, and people thinking that the ends justify the means, but we can get to that. Instead, the Federal Department of Justice backed away from taking that case. Wow. Because it was the end of the end of Clinton's term. W was about to come in to his first term. And the Clinton people didn't want to take on the extra work. And unfortunately, some of your listeners may think this is a, politicized comment, but it's just evidence shows it to be true. During Republican administrations, little to nothing gets done by the federal government on police reform. Yeah. And now we have 2 terms of W and 1 term of Donald J. Trump to show the way in which the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, which is the division responsible for covering law enforcement, is really hollowed out. And that's why the suit was brought by two civil rights attorneys, Jim Chanin and John Burris, who had been receiving reports of basically the people who were the victims of the rioters had been coming to them for months beforehand and saying, I got worked over. You know, these guys planted drugs on me. I'm in jail and I don't deserve to be. You know, I didn't have anything on me. They flaked me. And these attorneys, once Keith Batt's allegations, the young rookie's allegations, became public, realized, my God, this is what we had been hearing about. So they conducted their own investigation, went back, pulled together accounts from 119 victims of the rioters and filed a civil suit. And that civil suit, in order to resolve it and not, you know, break the bank, which the city of Oakland was looking at the time. And it's not, you know, it's not a wealthy place. It's not like Los Angeles or New York. They can't absorb the just enormous payouts that those cities make every year for police misconduct. They said, okay, well, we'll enter into a reform agreement overseen by a federal judge, and we'll agree to this reform program, and we'll try and clean our police department up. And this is really, you know, we want to be better. Mm-hmm. But the fact that the rioters weren't convicted of their criminal offenses, which were charged by the local DA, not state DOJ, not federal DOJ, for the sort of reason that, like, basically we tell a story that Bob Mueller was the U.S. attorney in San Francisco at the time. And the DAs who investigated the rioters' criminal conduct, because they didn't only commit administrative violations that got them fired, they committed crimes, alleged crimes. And the state DA and his inspector did their own investigation, found a mountain of evidence to that, went into Bob Mueller's office, who later ran the FBI and was one of the special counsels who investigated Donald Trump, put the evidence across the table to him. He flipped through it, looked through the papers, looked through the rap sheets of the people who were going to be alleged witnesses, many of whom had been involved in street narcotics to varying degrees, but nothing like we're not talking any Nino Browns or Felix Mitchells here. Pushes the folder back across the desk to the ADA, David Hollister, and says, I wish you the best of luck. So they passed on it. They completely passed on their responsibility to hold these cops accountable. Because, you know, how are you going to weigh the word in the thinking of the prosecutor? I'm weighing the word of people on the street versus decorated police officers. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's talk about that, what you mentioned earlier that leads into this, you know, the fact that it's really hard to convict a police officer in this thing because, you know, they're basically, you know, they're deemed as the ends justify the means. Let's talk about what that comment means that you mentioned earlier and how hard it is to get these convictions on officers and how much they know that they can get off. I mean, that's kind of the power behind it. I remember the shocked look on the face of the officer who killed George Floyd. He never thought he was going to get convicted. He thought he would get off too.
Well, there's a few things that come about to that. First off, it's worth keeping in mind that for many of the people who ended up suing the police department, the people who were the victims of the rioters, they'd actually had their day in court on their initial criminal case with an ADA charging out the case and a judge, hearing their challenges and hearing issues with the defense attorney may have presented issues with the cop or may have seen evidence prior that the police officer's word may not have been, you know, viable. And then they passed on it. They passed on their responsibility to pump the brakes and say, hey, hold on a minute. There have been issues in the past. Let's explore this a little bit more. And, you know, they would cut plea deals. These officers were allowed to stay on the street. And in the sense that, you know, when these officers were actually brought up for trial, you know, you have to keep in mind that the jury pool doesn't just pull from Oakland. It pulls from all across Alameda County. You can, you know, defense attorneys will challenge to try and get juries that don't have African-American residents of Oakland on them. That's one thing that they really pushed for in this case, to make sure that they would pull in a more suburban jury pool. And then even in Oakland, there's a divide between the hills and the flatlands, and the hills are where, you know, wealthier residents live, and they also experience their share of crime, but it tends to be property crime and break-ins and car theft rather than gun violence and homicide.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that their concerns aren't invalid, but in a certain sense, there's in a city like Oakland, which does have a high crime rate, and there's a lot of frustration with the persistence of this dynamic down the decades, and that's the sad truth. It's not the only American city like that. There's a subset of the population that believe that police officers have too many restrictions placed on them to do what they need to do, and they need to clean up the streets. And these officers, the riders, actually were part of a very hard-charging culture during the term of Mayor Jerry Brown, before he kind of in between his stints as California governor. This was during the beginning phase of his second political act. He ran for mayor in Oakland and I believe was elected in 96 or 8. And then after that, after his terms in Oakland, served as California Attorney General and then won election to the governor's office in the early 2010s.
Wow.
And while he ran for mayor, Brown had previous to that cultivated this image as a kind of a progressive, populist, environmentalist. He basically campaigned on a platform to make Oakland into this sort of green utopia. And by the time he got in office and started implementing his, there's certainly a very left-wing population in Oakland. It's sure that's the kind of place. It's right next door to Berkeley for folks of yours who may not be able to kind of situate the social milieu out there. And when he got in the office, I had people in city government. We had people in city government say to us, this guy came in and before we knew it, it was Rudy Giuliani West. And the cops were doing zero tolerance policing. They were, rousting homeless people from downtown, engaging in a very aggressive gentrification push. He would go to police lineups and urge the cops on, hey, clean up the streets, take these criminals off, da-da-da-da. And, that was kind of the underpinning atmosphere there. And Brown he didn't suffer any negative consequences from the Riders scandal. He kept climbing the ladder all the way up to Sacramento in the end, again. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you play the donor class, and the donor class is the one that's getting pulled over for tags and minor offenses. I remember at one point, Oakland had gotten in trouble. They were one of the first to really start they were scraping license plates with the new software system.
Yep.
Do you guys touch on that in the book? Is that relevant to the?
Yeah. So Oakland was one of these agencies that, after 9/11, there was a pretty substantial build out of local law enforcement's use of surveillance technology that had mostly been developed by the military and then implemented in time in domestic settings, networked surveillance cameras, motion detection, license plate readers, which can read your license plate and determine, whether or not your tag is out. There's a warrant out on your tag, or if you have X number of traffic tickets and they need to put a boot on you. Oakland, they've really kind of started in places like New York after 9/11, and there was a tremendous influx of federal grant money to building out that infrastructure, part of like hardening the homeland and the global war on terror, the kind of flip side of it, which some of your younger listeners may not remember. It's really a dark chapter in our history, and we're still dealing with the ramifications of it now. Yeah. But in Oakland, as of, I think by 2009, they'd gotten some grant money to build out a security project for the Port of Oakland, which is massive. It's in West Oakland. It's the main port for the Bay Area. It's one of, I think it's the 5th largest in the country at this point, depending on the volume of traffic, but it does tremendous business, and it's really a vast facility. So the Port of Oakland, they got money to build out security cameras and build out a decent security system for a very large facility. And in time, by 2013, somebody in the city government, a number of players in the city government had said, oh, well, we have all this grant money. We're going to build out a surveillance mechanism for the port. Hey, let's build a kind of centralized command post for the city, and we can deal with it. We can, use our license plate readers and cameras and gunshot detection audio to kind of look out for violent crime and maybe deal with some of the issues that we have with this. Because there's always this rationale, surveillance is a business. And it has no documented impact on violent crime and minimal documented impact on property crime. There are decades of studies to that effect. If listeners are interested, they can get into that literature. It's really, it's not a debate at this point.
We see the things where the guys run into shops now and they just clean out a shop. There's plenty of video of all of it. There's videos of the guys breaking into windows in San Francisco of cars. Doesn't stop anybody.
Nope. And it doesn't really help solve many of these cases either. So this is in 2013, and the city of Oak, it was a couple weeks, maybe a month after the Edward Snowden revelations came out, and there was a lot of attention on mass surveillance in the country. So it kind of kicked off an uproar. It's also worth keeping in mind that in 2013, Oakland had been in the midst had basically seen very sustained protest movements for about 4 years at that point, starting with the murder of an unarmed young black man, Oscar Grant, on New Year's Day, 2009, by Bay Area Rapid Police Officer Johannes Meserly. They made a film about it called Fruitvale Station. And, Meserly was eventually charged and convicted, but there were, very, very, very sustained and vigorous protests over that. For about 2 years, then in 2011, the Occupy movement in Oakland really brought together kind of a mix of folks who were involved in the Oscar Grant movement, which also focused on broader issues of police brutality, in Oakland and the Bay Area, and also a very strong student movement at the time that was protesting austerity measures by the state of California. And Occupy Oakland was part of the Occupy Wall Street movement. It was one of the most militant camps, engaged in really intense clashes with the local authorities, and was subjected to some really horrific repression. And there was a lot of surveillance, from federal and state law enforcement, of both the Oscar Grant movement and the Occupy movement. And there have been reporting to that effect. I did a lot of it. Darwin did some of it. And, when that surveillance center got crafted, we started looking at it and popping news about it, made a big deal, and we paid attention to the rationale for it. And in the test runs and the dry runs for the surveillance center, it had been up and running. It wasn't hard to kind of fuse together. And it had the support of the city council, which kind of really blithely, signed off on it, not knowing what the capabilities were, and hearing, it's going to address violent crime. Well, we trust law enforcement to do that. And in the dry runs, the police department had used it not to track down violent suspects or people involved in shootings and high-speed chases and grand theft auto, of which there's plenty. Take your pick on any given week. There's a couple different incidents that they could have used it for. Track people driving from one end of the city to the other across the freeways. It could have been done, but no, they used it to track protests and to keep tabs on demonstrations. So it's pretty clear from what they were for, what their intents were down the road. It's not, we got tons of documents. We got these emails back and forth and search for the terms protest, demonstration, banner, just all the key terms that could tell you what these were about. And we didn't find them. We found tons of stuff that related to protest. We didn't find anything that related to murder, shooting, homicide, 187, the penal code, anything like that. No, not at all.
Wow.
And as a result of that, City of Oakland implemented a standing oversight committee for its use of surveillance technology, which is still in place today and served as a model for similar bodies around the country. It's one of the things I'm most proud of, actually.
There you go. It's interesting to me. I remember the big kerfuffle when that came out, and the story broke, and people were looking at it. And I guess it was more designed to track those protests. But one of the biggest, we've had a lot of people that have come on, especially since George Floyd, and we've talked about racism in cities. We've talked about police brutality. We've talked about police brutality going back, into this, the 200 to 400 years of this country, and the abuses of police and racism have been combined to use. I believe police departments were initially started as slave recoverers that would go find slaves that escaped and bring them back. And that's really where policing evidently started in our nation, or at least that was the proponent of it. And it's interesting to me, of all the cities, is there any big city that, one of the things we've talked about is how a lot of times these cities use these revenue generating sort of things, like they were doing with the tagging and finding registrations and stuff. And they use it to harass people, especially in ghettos and areas that are more economically blighted, to try and it keeps those people down because they're constantly being harassed. They're being pulled over 2 or 3 times a day. They're being, just penalized to death. The warrant system, the payment system, there's even, what people deal with the, what's the bail money system. the cash bail system. And it really creates it really keeps people down and keeps them from moving up economically, and creates these depression zones economically that it's very hard for people to get out of. And is there any cities, you mentioned earlier in the podcast that there were, a lot of cities around there are under these agreements with the Justice Department. Mm-hmm. Are there any major cities that get this right? Or is this a endemic problem of just size and scale create abuse?
Well, in terms of the ways in which law enforcement and cities do treat, basically engage in that sort of regressive taxation against citizens for violations and so forth. I mean, I think that's one of the elements of the Ferguson Rebellion in 2014-15 that really kind of that cycle of protest really cast light on how, state does kind of lean on people in a certain class in certain zones and treat them as an extractive resource. I don't know if we've gotten it right. I think there's a broader recognition of the problem. When we're talking about mass incarceration, there's a sociologist at Berkeley who I studied under a little bit named Loic Wacant, who addresses the issue. It's not an idea of mass incarceration. That's a little bit of a misnomer. The idea is correct. That we're putting tremendous numbers of people behind bars in a disproportionate way to any other country in the world. For some of them, many of them, for nonviolent offenses. Mm-hmm. And, or some people because they can't pay for it. They can't pay for their freedom. And pretrial detention is a huge issue. But the misnomer here is that Wacant cites, and I actually believe this, is that it's not mass incarceration, it's hyper-incarceration. In New York City, where I grew up, there's such thing called super blocks. They're referred to as super blocks. They're areas of the city, they're specific census tract zip codes, which you look at the number of people in state prisons and jails who are from these areas, it's just wildly out of proportion to anywhere else.
Wow.
Super blocks. Those are the areas that are so heavily policed, right?
Wow.
And for instance, if I'm sitting out on my stoop with a can of beer, say it's before the New York State legalizes weed, and I'm smoking a blunt and I'm drinking a bunch of open beers and I have music playing, right? Chances are in certain neighborhoods in the city, I won't get rolled on. However, if I'm in one of these super block areas, there are going to be cops on the street probably doing vertical patrols of the building, right? If it's a public housing project or back in the day, they used to have private apartment buildings that would have, landlords that would let cops into patrol to keep order. And then I would get written up. And if I had a warrant out, or if I was on probation or parole and I got searched and I had a box cutter or a folding knife on me, I'd go.
Wow.
Get sent back in, because that's just, okay, well, the state's looking at you and the officer's looking for something, because the officer has an incentive to hit a quota and show activity for his day to please his bosses, who then pleases the city council member, which then pleases the mayor, because they want to show the citizens they're doing something. So all this pressure of the state to address deeper issues that law enforcement actually is not equipped to address. David Simon, the creator of The Wire, writer of Homicide, very, very astute observer of law enforcement, has shown this many times in his fiction and in his journalism, that police are basically used as a Swiss Army knife by the state to address issues that they're not prepared or trained to deal with, and that no one institution can deal with. Mm-hmm. And when all that downward pressure of the state is focused on people at the law, it doesn't really hit the people it doesn't fall on people the same way. It falls on the most vulnerable people, the people who don't have the ability to shelter out, who are under the most constant pressure by the state. And, it's a way in which we really kind of look at the American law enforcement system as being broken. Mm-hmm. And I think this book demonstrates that in the case of one city, and that can be extrapolated out. I think there are echoes that readers have found and will find to other cities in their own communities.
It's interesting. We've had a lot of conversations with authors on the show about their books. And the term, that politicians will use, especially Reaganites, Republicans, sort of people tend to use is the rule of law. We're going to reinvoke the rule of law. You saw that started with Nixon, probably before that somewhere. But it's really heavy-handed with Nixon. Then you saw it with Reagan. What was interesting with Reagan was Reagan took away a lot of the kind of social support that you had for people that had mental problems that needed, to be put in an institution and get some mental help. A lot of that was taken away and defunded, and the police were left to handle those sort of people.
Don't forget the Clintons either.
The Clintons, go ahead, fill us in.
Yeah, I mean, in the Clinton era, a lot of the support for public housing was also rolled back. Mm-hmm. The rest of the, social safety net was really shredded during that era too. It was a bipartisan project, and the way that the Democrats decided to tack right in the 1990s kind of followed that Reaganite playbook.
That's right. They cleaned up welfare, tried to clean it up, and they pulled back a bunch of stuff, huh?
The benefits really decreased tremendously. Public housing there's less support for Section 8. Mm-hmm. Our homelessness issue now, which is a national problem, it's really acute in the Mountain West and in the West. Mm-hmm. And it's not really great on the East Coast either. But that stems from kind of the rollback of the supportive housing, mental hospitals, treatment programs, drug treatment programs, things like that. And once you leave these people on the street to have their breakdowns in public, what's going to happen? The cops are going to be the person that has to address them. And they're not a caseworker. They're not a mental health expert. You're expecting so much of these people, and it's really, in a way, it's kind of unfair to them.
Do you guys address in the book the sort of thing that came after George Floyd with the police reform, where they were like, they called it was a horrible term, defund the police, but basically, this idea to maybe have the police not handle, mental health calls and things of that nature.
Yeah, we deal with, to us that the George Floyd, the protest movement, that portion of the Black Lives Matter movement, that cycle, the second cycle, started with George Floyd. It really is part of, you got to look at it kind of, you got to pull back and step back from it and see the forest and not look at the trees and see the forest. It really, in the U.S., there's been kind of this pendulum that happens with law enforcement. The pendulum swings one way towards mano duro, law and order, crackheads and take names, clean up the streets, restore order, and then, you do that for a while and you violate people's rights and you treat them like chattel and you treat, the police become viewed as an occupying army. That leads to things like the Black Panther movement. That leads to things like, calls for police reform. That also leads to things like people going out and taking shots at cops and DAs, which did happen in the 60s and 70s. Wow. It happened in the 1910s and 20s too, right before the Palmer raids. Mm-hmm. So, and again, we touch on all this. Your readers can dive into it. I promise we don't make it dull. None of this is dull. So there are these swings back and forth after, the ways in which the American establishment clashed with left-wing radicals and anti-war protesters in the 1960s. There were reform efforts in the 1970s. The Oakland Police Department was probably, until the consent decree was passed down in the 2000s. In the 1970s, they actually had a reform-minded chief named Charles Gaine, who was a white man, grew up in Oakland from a Dust Bowl family. He migrated to Oakland when he was a kid. He wasn't down with having a racist, jackbooted police department. He actually wanted to do things better. He established a white-collar crimes unit, a tenant protection unit. He had early intervention programs and training programs for officers to make sure that if they got in confrontations, they'd sit down and basically talk them through in these sessions and figure out how they could deal with it differently and try to make that individual officer better and more responsive to the community. Mm-hmm. So, and then, of course, there's a backlash. The funding dries up. The old guard and the police union wants to do things the old-fashioned way and doesn't want these newfangled reforms coming in there and taking their beloved institution apart, push the guy out. Funny story. He was then brought in later by Mayor Dianne Feinstein in San Francisco before she made her way to Congress. And basically, when Harvey Milk was murdered by ex-SFPD officer Dan White, there were really big disturbances in the Castro, which was the LGBTQ district and still is the LGBTQ district in San Francisco. And, the cops wanted to go in there and crack heads. And Chief Gaine said, no, you're not doing that. Stand down. They're venting themselves. Feinstein fired him because he refused to let the cops loose.
Wow.
Yep. Maybe she'll remember it. Maybe she won't. She probably won't.
I don't think she will, because evidently she's not remembering much these days.
That's what historians are for.
I'm not knocking Dianne Feinstein. I'm just saying she's not all there, and her staff has agreed to that. But it's interesting how these politicians rise. I mean, kind of what we've been talking to, and kind of what I've been building on is maybe that's our biggest problem. We need to care about electing better politicians. But, I think sometimes we seem to, more and more over the years, we've had this donor class ruling, this oligarchy of our country. The Supreme Court things have basically made it so you can buy your politicians and different things, Citizens United, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really made it so there's a big wide gap between us, and it's almost like we'll keep the people down so they are complacent workforce and complacent people, and so that we can make all our money and just keep cracking heads. And I imagine some of these, from what you guys documented, some of these you kind of alluded to it. So I'll ask you if there's more to that. But it seems like these police officer departments, they just keep on rolling. They're just like, whatever, that guy's here for 2 to 4 years. Whatever, we're just going to keep doing our thing and busting heads.
Yeah, I mean, that is one way in which, unfortunately, being a police chief they seldom last for more than 4 or 5 years, and that's a long term. Yeah. There are ways in which law enforcement, because it's such a paramilitary culture and it's a top-down culture, the reform is expected, the actual leadership of the institution is expected to come from the top, but in reality, it comes from like the sergeant, lieutenant level, and the training op, basically like the senior patrol officer. Those guys set the example of what happens on the street. And realistically, if you have good people in those positions, who respect the law and try and treat people equitably and aren't out there to abuse folks, maybe your law enforcement, can actually enforce the law equitably for everybody. And if there's an old guard culture in place, or there's a culture in place that protects people who are abusive and who flaunt the law because they're popular or because they're in with a certain clique of supervisors, or because they deliver the numbers that make the supervisors look good, even if those cases end up falling apart and costing the city hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, that poisons the institution. And that decreases community trust in the agency. And honestly, the one thing about Oakland that really has worked is that the citizenry in Oakland have been aware of the issues with their police department for decades. The earliest state investigation of OPD was in 1949. Wow. And that's quite early. And the Black Panther Party certainly didn't occur within a vacuum. The 1970s and 80s also saw very sustained movements for police accountability, the creation of a review board following egregious instances of people being shot by the cops, unarmed people, young folks being shot by the cops unjustifiably, and them getting away with it. So the reason why the consent decree has persisted for so long, or has basically resulted in a lot of good changes in Oakland, and why the city council, all the politicians in Oakland have to be aware of this issue, is that the citizenry never lets them forget, right? There are a lot of civil rights attorneys in the area who will basically watchdog the police department and file suits against them and try and get settlements, and succeed in getting settlements to address things like unwarranted strip searches, which the Oakland Police Department used to do of people in public. They used to strip you in public and search you, cavity search you sometimes in the middle of the street if they thought you had narcotics. And we're not talking 1960. We're talking 2005, 2009.
Holy crap.
Yeah. Dropping a grown man's pants in the middle of the morning in front of a bus full of morning commuters and telling them to drop them and spread them. We're talking about a police department that, as of 2008, had falsified about 60% of all narcotics warrants.
Holy crap. That's a lot.
I mean, this is the sort of thing when these issues they're brought up and they're examined and the people try and deal with them as best as possible. Those sorts of scandals are not happening in the present day because there's been such a volume of intensive watchdogging in the police department. However, it's not perfect. There are some issues with current internal affairs investigations that may or may not lead to the police department extending their oversight. We've yet to see. There's a hearing later this month to that effect, but the pattern that's emerging, the information that's emerging, is not really it's not promising.
There you go.
Yeah. But that doesn't mean that things haven't changed. You know, in the early 2010s, late 2000s, when I was really covering officer-involved shootings on the day-to-day, you know, the Oakland Police Department would shoot about 12, 15 people a year and kill several of them. A number of them would be unarmed, and they'd end up costing the city millions of dollars, oftentimes involving officers involved in a number of prior shootings, some of whom had been fired and then rehired because of problems with the internal affairs process, which then, you know, was base case in point evidence that the reforms hadn't taken place and hadn't been effectively implemented. So there has been progress, you know, to this day. At this point in time, the police department shoots and kills at least 1 or 2 people a year, and no one should be shot and killed by the police or anybody else for that matter. But that's a dramatic reduction, and that's because of the ways in which the pursuit policies have changed. The use of force training has changed. The reporting has changed. The early intervention for officers involved in uses of force that fall below the level of pulling your weapon and shooting at somebody, pulling a taser on somebody, using your baton, using your OC spray on someone, using a restraint hold on somebody. You know, if you hit a certain number of those, you get a talking to and say, okay, well, let's look at these situations. What are you doing that gets you into these sorts of confrontations again and again and again? Are you pulling up too close to suspect vehicles? Are you engaging in chases that maybe your supervisor has told you to break off on the radio because rate of speed is too high, street's too narrow, you're posing a risk to civilians and so on? Those things have changed, but it's by no means perfect. And I think that the changes have happened, the lasting changes have happened because the citizenry have not let up over decades.
There you go. And they shouldn't.
Yeah, and that really is the thing about police reform, about policing and holding law enforcement accountable in this country. It comes from the citizens, and it's possible to a degree. Have we arrived at the end point? No, we have. There's a lot more work to be done. But the work happens at your local community, and it happens over time. It's not an instantaneous thing. It's not, you know, click and gratify like we're so used to in this culture these days.
Yeah, and some of these politicians will just grab hey, we arrested a lot of people, you know, the Rudy Giuliani sort of method of search and whatever. And they're like, the rest are up. And people will be like, oh, okay, that's good. That means that, you know, the streets are getting cleaned up by the politician we hired to clean up the streets and the rule of law. And so you see that, but we don't. Somebody needs to sit down and, like, really, maybe someone has, look at the cost of it. Because, you know, I look at the extraordinary costs of what we pay out to, you know, prisoners that were wrongly imprisoned, the millions of dollars for the civil rights stuff. You need to add all this up and go, at some point, you know, people that vote for these politicians or citizens just need to go, hey, man, what this is costing us in taxpayer funds to settle these lawsuits could be better spent someplace else. I mean, I think logically we could. Call me crazy. I don't know.
Well, that's the tragedy of the defund slogan. It's not about defunding law enforcement. It's about taking some of the money that you put towards that repressive apparatus and putting it into positive programs, right? 1960s, the Great Society program under President Lyndon B. Johnson, aimed at trying to, you know, after the Watts Rebellion and after a lot of the similar, you know, upheavals in the mid-1960s against repressive policing, doesn't sound familiar to anybody, and, you know, civil rights abuses. The Johnson and the Kerner Commission report, which is a remarkable document and reads as if it was written yesterday with some small, you know, changes to demographic and information and a little bit of other technology. You know, these issues, they try to address them through social programs, through funding community building programs and intervention and non-law enforcement public safety initiatives. And there was a lot of resistance to that around the country, including in Oakland. Mayor John Houlihan in the 1960s actually rejected Great Society funds because they thought they were coddling criminals and so forth. And, you know, and that is worth noting that as of the 1960s, Oakland was run by a Anglo-Saxon Republican conservative milieu. And by the late 1970s, they had one of the country's first African-American mayors and a very progressive city council. So that was a direct result. That was kind of the Panthers and the anti-war movement were kind of the Symbionese Liberation Army, obviously, was one of the most extreme ends of it. They were the flashy, media. They were flashy media events and, movements which had substance to them, but a lot of attention focused there and not much of it focused on the, undercurrents that led to Lionel Wilson being elected to City Hall. The social movement that kind of pulled behind him. And, Barbara Lee, the congresswoman from Oakland, one of the few people to vote, one of the only congressional representative to vote against the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. She's going to run for Senate now, but she got her start as a volunteer for Shirley Chisholm's campaign and, doing social programs with the Black Panther Party, one of their arms. So it shows that those social movements pulled a lot of people along in their wake and really changed things, but in a way that that slow change is it's not sexy. It doesn't capture the attention in the same way. And let's be honest, I've been a reporter for almost 17 years now. Reporters go for the shiny dimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you hope people come away from reading your guys' book?
Well, first off, I hope they come away with a sense of place. Oakland's a wonderful city. Despite some of the impressions that you may get from it in the book, but it's a wonderful place, and we wanted this to be something that felt like the city. We want you to feel like you get something of the city when you're there and when you're reading it. We also hope that you come away with a proper understanding. Well, not proper, but that the lesson that the police are a coercive apparatus, that it's an arm of the state that was designed for social control and to protect power, that's really, and that crime suppression and control was a justification that came around later on, in the 20th century, as the institution evolved, as society evolved. It's not to say it's not important, but is law enforcement the best way? Are police the best way to address that issue? To not, because that's not what they were designed to do to begin with. And we do hope that there's some inspiration to be drawn on from the actions of some of these individuals in our book, these whistleblowers who were ostracized by other cops, had their lives threatened, really put through the ringer and ostracized, while the riders themselves still to this day remain very popular amongst the current and retired Oakland cops. Oh yeah. I mean, that's when you talk about a poison culture, that's really an example of it. The fact that they're still very much involved in the Oakland social circles, and Keith Batt's name is mud. Unjustly, I would say. But I think that their actions, the actions of all these citizens who we name, and many of whom we don't name, people who took part in these protest movements down the years, the folks who showed up at city council meetings and really tried to hash out these issues and come to a better solution, took part in these commissions, volunteered for them, showed up, watchdogged, made public comment. We hope that serves as some sort of inspiration, because it's not about us. It's not about the book that we wrote. I mean, the book that we wrote is really about the community. And we wanted to reflect the efforts that the community has made in Oakland over, so long to really try and make their city a better place. And I think that in some ways, it is a better place. It certainly is a better place than it was in the summer of 2000 when Keith Batt was riding the streets in West Oakland with Chuck Mabanag, Matt Hornung, Jude Ciapno, and Frank Vasquez, and just was blown away at the depravity that he saw.
Yeah, it's just crazy. You look at things going back from whistleblowers, going back to Serpico in the 70s and things like that. And yeah, there's a lot of change that we need to make. And it's great that you guys write these books, because you guys bring them to light as the fourth estate and, report on what's going on. And, that's the only way change can happen, is education and exposing shining a light on all this stuff. So thank you very much, Allie, for coming on the show and sharing this with us.
Thank you so much, Chris. Darwin wishes he could have been here as well, but this has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope that the listeners really pick the book up and give it a read, give it a listen. The audiobook is briefed beautifully, and again, it was an honor to write it, and we hope that it really does have some influence on the national conversation and in communities that beyond Oakland.
Yeah, I mean, we need reform. We need to do things better. I mean, the prison industrial complex that we have is just extraordinary at how it feeds itself and operates itself. And, everything needs to be better in the world. So we need to all work towards that end. Ali, give us your .com so people can find you on the interwebs, please.
Unfortunately, I don't maintain a website. I will one of these days, but I'm so caught up in the day-to-day of my reporting. I'm at Winston on Twitter. You can reach me at ali.winston@protonmail.com. Secured encrypted email. I'm on that platform. You can find me through there, and then we can take it to other channels. But other thing that I do a lot of work on the far right as well, extremism. I report for the British Broadcasting Corporation, Rolling Stone, New York Magazine, a bunch of other places, Der Spiegel every now and then. So I have another arm of what I do that's separate, that is similar but separate to law enforcement. But that's where you can find me. This book is in stores. The Writers Come Out at Night, published by Atria Books. Please, if you can, shop at your local bookstore.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Pick up the book wherever fine books are sold, folks. You can order it up. It's available now from January 10th, 2023. The Writers Come Out at Night, Brutality, Corruption, and Cover-Up in Oakland. An amazing story by Ali Winston and Darwin BondGraham. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. We certainly appreciate you guys being here. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, all those places on the internet that we are, LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys next time.